I want to show you something today that I've wanted to show people for a long time. I'm going to show you some specific verses, famous verses, verses you know, where the Greek New Testament has a problem, a real problem. Either the Greek manuscripts can't agree with each other on what the text says, or the Greek produces a statement that creates a contradiction. Or the Greek makes Jesus say something that conflicts with everything else Jesus taught. And then I'm going to show you how, in every single case, one ancient Aramaic word resolves the problem completely. It's not a tortured interpretation. It's not a theological workaround. It's one word in the language Jesus actually spoke that explains exactly why the Greek went wrong and exactly what the original said. Now, some of you who've been following this series have been building up to this. We've looked at the historical case, William Norton's research, the scholarly arguments for the Syriac New Testament. But today we stop arguing about the background and we look at the text itself. Today we open the hood. Let's go. Lost in Translation. That's the title of this presentation, and it's exactly what happened. The New Testament was originally written in Aramaic, the language Jesus spoke, the language his apostles spoke, the language of the earliest Christian communities from Palestine to Mesopotamia to the coast of India. At some point early on, that Aramaic was translated into Greek. And in the process of translation, some things went wrong. Not catastrophically wrong, though. The core message of the gospel survived intact. But wrong in specific, traceable, demonstrable ways that have been creating confusion and contradiction and theological difficulty ever since. Today, we're looking at three categories of evidence. The first is what scholars call split words. These are cases where different Greek New Testament manuscripts use completely different words, and where one Aramaic word explains both of them. The Greek manuscripts aren't disagreeing randomly. They're all translating the same Aramaic original, but making different choices. The second category is mistranslations. Cases where the Greek translator picked the wrong meaning of an Aramaic word and created a statement that is theologically awkward or logically impossible or flat out contradicted by the rest of the New Testament. The third category is lost idioms. Cases where the Aramaic had a beautiful, precise, poetic saying, and the Greek translation lost the structure entirely, leaving us with something muddled that scholars have been arguing about for centuries. We'll see multiple examples of each type. And I want to say up front, you don't need to know Aramaic to follow any of this. I'll explain every word as we go. If you can pick up 10 different Bibles and notice that they disagree with each other, you're ahead of where we need to start. Before we look at the examples, I need to explain the mechanism. Because once you understand how split words work, every example after this is going to land differently. Here's the situation. We have hundreds of surviving Greek New Testament manuscripts. Scholars have been comparing them for centuries, and sometimes, not rarely, but regularly, they find a verse where the manuscripts split into two camps. Half of them have one word. The other half have a completely different word. And I don't mean a variant spelling of the same word or a grammatical form that differs slightly. I mean two totally different words with different meanings that don't look alike and don't sound alike, right in the middle of the same verse. How does this happen? If someone wrote a sentence in Greek and then scribes copied it, you might get occasional copying errors. A letter dropped, a word misspelled. But how do you get two entirely different words? Here's the answer the evidence keeps pointing to. There was an Aramaic original, and that Aramaic original had one word. Let's call the word X. And word X in Aramaic has two meanings. One translator looked at word X and chose meaning A. Another translator looked at the same word X but chose meaning B. Both of them are now in the Greek manuscript tradition. This is why, when you compare the Greek manuscripts, you find two completely different words. However, the Aramaic isn't contradicting itself. The Aramaic has one word that covers both meanings. It's the source. The Greek manuscripts are the translations, and the split between them is the fingerprint of that original Aramaic word. Now, you might say, couldn't this happen by coincidence? Couldn't scribes independently invent a second reading without any Aramaic original? It's possible, once, maybe twice, but we're going to look at this pattern occurring in Paul's letter to the Corinthians, in the book of John, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, in Acts, over and over and over. At what point does coincidence become impossible? At what point does the pattern become the proof? For me, personally, it was around the fifth or sixth example. Your number may vary, but by the time we're done today, I think you'll have a number too. Let's start with one of the most famous chapters in the entire New Testament, 1 Corinthians 13, Paul's great meditation on love. You've probably read it at weddings. Love is patient, love is kind. Verse 3 is the climax of Paul's argument. He's been listing extraordinary acts of sacrifice, giving away everything you own, giving your body itself, and saying that without love, none of it counts for anything. Now pick up the King James Bible. It says, "Though I give my body to be burned, and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing." Burned. Fair enough. Dramatic self-sacrifice. Now pick up the ISV, the International Standard Version, and it says, "Though I surrender my body so that I may boast, but have no love, I get nothing out of it." Boast. Burned, boast. These are not the same word. These aren't even close to the same word. In Greek, to burn and to boast look completely different, sound completely different, and mean completely different things. So how did we end up with two camps of Greek manuscripts, one saying burn and one saying boast, in one of the most carefully preserved and most famous passages in the New Testament? The Aramaic Peshitta has the answer. The word used in the Peshitta is DQY. Those are the letters. And the Aramaic root means both to burn and to boast. One translator read the letters DQY and wrote burned, a perfectly reasonable choice. Another read the same word, the same letters, and wrote boast. Also a perfectly reasonable choice. Both of them were working from the same Aramaic original. Both of them produce Greek that can't be reconciled with the other. And both readings survived into the manuscript tradition for centuries afterward. Incidentally, Dr. Bruce Metzger, probably the greatest Greek New Testament textual critic of the 20th century, and someone who was not sympathetic to Aramaic primacy arguments, noted in his textual commentary that one of the Greek variant readings in this verse is, and I'm quoting him, a grammatical monstrosity that cannot be attributed to Paul. The variants are so awkward in the Greek that even the leading Greek scholar of his generation couldn't make them work. In Aramaic, they make perfect sense. That's example 1. Keep that feeling. We're just getting started. Now, this next one is different from the first. This isn't a case where the Greek manuscripts disagree with each other. All the Greek manuscripts say the same thing. This is a case where the Aramaic reveals what the Greek lost even while getting the basic word technically right. You know this saying. Every Christian knows this saying. Jesus is talking about wealth and the kingdom of God, and he says, "It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God." It's in Matthew, it's in Mark, it's in Luke. All three say camel. All the Greek manuscripts say camel. And for centuries, scholars have been puzzling over exactly what Jesus meant. Is it a literal camel? Is there a gate in Jerusalem called the Needle's Gate? Is it a metaphor for the impossible? Here's what the Aramaic tells us. The Aramaic word Gamla, Gamla, means camel. It also means a thick rope woven from camel hair, the kind used by sailors and fishermen to moor boats to the dock. A 10th century Aramaic lexicographer named Bar Balul defined it explicitly. Gamla is a thick rope which is used to bind ships. Now consider where Jesus was when he said this. He was on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. He was speaking to fishermen, men who used exactly this kind of rope every single day of their working lives. When Jesus said Gamla, they would have immediately pictured a ship's mooring rope, thick, heavy, practically indestructible. It is easier to thread a ship's mooring rope through the eye of a needle. That's a vivid, concrete, immediately recognizable image for a fishing community. Not a camel, an animal that doesn't even live by the Sea of Galilee. A rope, the rope they worked with every day. The Greek translator saw Gamla and wrote camel. That's the more common meaning of the word. It wasn't a mistake exactly. Gamla does mean camel. But it was the wrong choice for this context. And with that one translation choice, the fishing rope image that Jesus had crafted for his audience disappeared forever. And scholars have been inventing explanations for the camel ever since. The Aramaic word is the only reason the saying has two meanings. It's the only reason the confusion exists. And it's the only thing that resolves it. Now, I want to show you something that I think is the single most structurally decisive piece of evidence in this entire presentation. John chapter 12, verse 41. John has just quoted the prophet Isaiah, and he adds a note. Isaiah saw the glory of Jesus and spoke about him. It's a simple sentence. But watch what happens when you compare the Greek manuscripts. Some Greek manuscripts, the Alexandrian family, including the ancient Codex Vaticanus and Codex Sinaiticus, they connect the two halves with the word because. Isaiah said this because he saw Jesus' glory. Other Greek manuscripts, the Byzantine family, used in the King James tradition, use the word when. Isaiah said this when he saw his glory. And then there is one Greek manuscript, just one, called Manuscript W, that uses a third word entirely, since. 3 different words, 3 different Greek manuscripts, the same verse, it's the same event. Now, because, when, and since, they're not the same Greek word written different ways. They are 3 distinct Greek words with 3 distinct meanings. So how did 3 translators, working from what was supposedly the same Greek original, end up with 3 different words? In Aramaic, the word spelled DK means because. It also means when, and it also means since. All 3. One word, 3 meanings, depending on how the translator reads the context. The Greek manuscripts, they're not disagreeing with each other. They are all translating the same Aramaic word. 3 translators made 3 different choices, and all 3 choices survived into the Greek manuscript tradition, where they've been a puzzle ever since. Think about what this means. If John originally wrote in Greek, he wrote one word. Where did the other 2 come from? No theory of scribal error produces 3 different words that each happen to correspond to one of the meanings of the specific Aramaic root. That is not error. That is translation. And the Aramaic original is the only explanation that accounts for all 3 readings simultaneously. 3 manuscripts, 3 translations from one Aramaic word. We move now from split words to mistranslations. And I'm starting with the most theologically loaded verse in this entire presentation. Matthew 27, verse 46, the crucifixion. Jesus has been on the cross for 6 hours, and he cries out, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. And when the Greek translates it, my God, why have you forsaken me? Every Greek-based Bible in existence gives you that translation. King James, the NIV, the ESV, the NASB, every single one. The word forsaken. And this has caused an enormous amount of theological difficulty. Did God abandon his own son at the moment of the crucifixion? If so, what does that mean? How do you reconcile that with what Jesus was saying in John 16? The Father is always with me. I am never alone. How do you reconcile it with the rest of Jesus' teaching about the Father's constant faithfulness? Christian theologians have spent centuries trying to explain this verse, and they've come up with various answers. Jesus was quoting Psalm 22, which ends in triumph. God temporarily withdrew his felt presence. At that moment, Jesus bore the full weight of sin. These are serious theological proposals, and I don't dismiss them. But the Aramaic gives us something much simpler. The word Sabakthani comes from the Aramaic root spelled SHBQ. And this word means to forsake. But it also means to spare, to leave, to permit, to set aside. My God, why have you spared me? Read the scene again with that translation. Jesus has been in agony for 6 hours. He knows his work is complete. He knows what comes next. And he asks, not in abandonment, not in despair, but with urgency, why have you kept me here this long? Let's finish this. Shortly after this cry, he died. Here's the piece of evidence I find most compelling. If Jesus had meant forsaken, if he had wanted to express abandonment, there was an Aramaic word for that, the word tatani. It means forsaken, unambiguously, and no other meaning possible. But Jesus did not use that word. He used Sabakthani, the word with the broader range. And consider, the Jews standing at the cross spoke Aramaic as their mother tongue. They heard everything Jesus said. Not one of them recorded this as a confession that God had abandoned him. They thought he was calling for Elijah. They misheard the name. But none of them said, he says God forsook him. Because that's not what he said. The Greek translator chose one meaning of Sabakthani. It was a legitimate meaning, but it was the wrong one. Luke chapter 14, verse 26. This is a verse that atheists and critics of Christianity love to quote, because on its face it is genuinely troubling. Jesus says, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple." Hate. The Greek word is misio. In Greek, it means hate, straightforward, strong, to hate someone. And every Greek-based Bible translates it as hate, because that's what the Greek says. But then you have this problem. The same Jesus in the same Gospels tells us to love our neighbors, to love our enemies, to honor our father and mother, to love one another as he has loved us. The whole Sermon on the Mount is built on love. So does he want us to hate our families or to love them? The Greek produces a flat contradiction between two genuine teachings of Jesus. The Aramaic word is sone, and sone means to hate. But it also means to put aside, to set at a lower priority, to have an aversion to. The semantic range in Aramaic is broader and considerably less violent than the Greek misio. Correct translation. If any man comes to me and does not put aside his father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. That is completely consistent with everything else Jesus taught. He's not commanding hatred. He's commanding priority. Following him requires that no other loyalty, family, self, security, comfort, comes first. This is the same thing he's saying when he tells his disciples to leave their nets, when he tells someone to let the dead bury the dead, when he says no one can serve two masters. There is no contradiction. There never was a contradiction. The Greek translator used the primary meaning of sone, to hate, and in so doing created an apparent conflict between two genuine apostolic teachings that has been puzzling readers and delighting critics for 2,000 years. One Aramaic word, the problem and the solution in the same root. Acts chapter 2, verse 24, the day of Pentecost. Peter is preaching the first Christian sermon right there in Jerusalem, explaining the resurrection of Jesus. He says, God raised him up, loosing the pangs of death, because it was not possible for him to be held by it. Now read that again. Loosing the pangs of death? That's strange English, isn't it? What does it mean to loose a pang? You can loose a rope. You can loose a chain. But a pang? How do you loose a pang? Modern translations have tried all sorts of things with this phrase. The agonies of death, the birth pains of death, the grip of death. Every translation is trying to make sense of an image that doesn't quite work. Because it doesn't quite work. It's a mistranslation. The Aramaic word is hyblix, and this word has two distinct meanings. One is labor pains, travail, suffering. That's how the Greek translator read it. But the other is rope, cord, cable, and that's the one that belongs here. Now here's the thing. The same word with the meaning rope or cable appears in the very same New Testament just a few chapters later. In Acts 27 verse 32, when sailors are cutting the ropes of the ship, the Aramaic is the same root. But in that context, the translator got it right, because cutting the panes of a ship is obviously nonsense. In Acts 2:24, he chose the wrong one. The correct translation is, God raised him up, loosing the cords of Sheol, because it was not possible for him to be held by it. The cords of Sheol. Now that's an image. And in every strand of ancient Semitic literature, Hebrew, Aramaic, Akkadian, Sheol, the realm of the dead, is described as a prison. The dead are there, bound and captive. And Peter is saying, God cut the ropes. The resurrection is the jailbreak. And this isn't Peter inventing a new image. This is a quotation from the Psalms. Psalm 18 verse 5. The cords of Sheol surrounded me. The snares of death confronted me. Psalm 116 verse 3. The cords of death encompassed me, and the terrors of Sheol came upon me. Peter's Jewish audience at Pentecost knew these psalms by heart. When he said God loosed the cords of Sheol, they would have heard it immediately. They would have felt it. The Greek translator missed the cord, and we've been loosed from the pains of death ever since, which as images go makes considerably less sense. Matthew chapter 26 verse 6. Just before the Last Supper, Jesus is in Bethany, and a woman comes and anoints him with expensive oil. Both Matthew and Mark record this happened in the house of, and I'm quoting the Greek-based text here, Simon the leper. Now, I need you to hold that phrase for a moment. Simon the leper, a dinner party, in a house, in the town of Bethany, with Jesus and all his disciples as guests. And here is the problem. Leviticus chapter 13, verses 45 and 46. The law of Moses on leprosy. I'm quoting. As for the leper who has the infection, his clothes shall be torn, and the hair of his head shall be uncovered, and he shall cover his mustache and call out, unclean, unclean. He shall remain unclean all the days during which he has the infection. He is unclean. He shall live alone. His place of habitation shall be outside the camp. Outside the camp. He shall live alone, crying unclean whenever he approaches anyone. So, what is a leper doing hosting a dinner party in the middle of a populated town? How is he allowed in a house at all? Why does no one in the room, not Jesus, not the disciples, not the women with the oil, not any of the other guests, react to the presence of someone who is legally required to cry out that he is unclean? Why doesn't anyone mention it, flinch, or comment on it? Commentators have tried many answers. He was a former leper Jesus had already healed. The term was used loosely for any skin condition. The law wasn't strictly enforced in Bethany. None of those is satisfying, and none of them comes from the text. They're all added to rescue the text. But the Aramaic tells us exactly what happened. Garibo, which means leper, and gorobo, which means potter or jar merchant, are spelled with the same 4 consonants in ancient Aramaic: Gomal, Rish, Beit, Olaf. Ancient Aramaic was written without vowel markers, just like Hebrew. The vowels were not on the page. The translator looked at those 4 consonants and chose the wrong vowels. He read leper when the text said jar maker. Simon the jar maker. Now read the story again. A woman comes to the home of Simon the jar maker. She has an alabaster jar, his specialty, filled with expensive oil. She breaks it and pours it over Jesus. Of course the scene is set in the home of someone who works with jars. Of course nobody in the room reacts to the host as though he's a leper. Because he isn't. 1 translator, 4 consonants, no vowels on the page, 2 very similar Aramaic words. And from that moment on, every reader of Matthew and Mark has been puzzling over the leper at the dinner party. Matthew chapter 7, verse 6, the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus says, "Do not give what is holy to dogs, and do not throw your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces." Now the second half of that verse is clear and memorable. Do not throw your pearls before swine. Everyone knows that saying. It's a vivid image. Valuable things offered to creatures who don't appreciate them. But the first half? Do not give what is holy to dogs. What holy thing? What does it mean to give a holy thing to a dog? The image is underdeveloped, unclear, and frankly odd compared to the clean clarity of the pearls and the swine. Most readers sense the imbalance. One half of the verse is vivid, the other is vague, but they can't explain it. But the Aramaic can. There are 2 translation errors in this verse. 2 in the same sentence. The first, the Aramaic word kusha, which can mean holy thing, which is what the Greek translator chose. But it also means earring or nose ring, not a metaphorical ring, an actual piece of jewelry. This meaning appears repeatedly in the Aramaic Targums, the ancient Aramaic paraphrases of the Hebrew scriptures, in passages about jewelry given as gifts. The second error, the Aramaic verb translated as give. It should be hang, as in to hang something onto something. So, the correct translation of this verse is, do not hang earrings on dogs, and do not throw your pearls before swine. You see what just happened? The verse now has perfect parallelism. Earrings on dogs, pearls before swine, 2 items of jewelry, 2 animals, 2 images of valuable things given to creatures that have absolutely no use for them. The verse is a perfectly balanced couplet, elegant, memorable, completely characteristic of how Jesus taught. The Greek preserved the second image intact. The translator got pearls right. He got swine right. But on the first half, he chose holy thing instead of earring, and give instead of hang. And with those 2 choices, the structural beauty of the saying collapsed into something muddled. And the muddled version is what every Bible reader has been reading for 2 millennia. The parallelism only exists in the Aramaic. The Greek can't produce it because the Greek lost the words that create it. Last example, and I've saved this one for a particular reason, because this is the one to have ready the next time someone tells you that the Bible is full of contradictions. The book of Acts describes Paul's conversion on the road to Damascus, twice, once in chapter 9 and once in chapter 22, where Paul himself is recounting it. Both accounts describe the same event, a blinding light, the voice of Jesus, and Paul's companions standing nearby. Acts chapter 9, verse 7. And the men which journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice, but seeing no man. Acts chapter 22, verse 9. And they that were with me saw indeed the light, and were afraid, but they heard not the voice of him that spake to me. Heard a voice. Heard not the voice. 2 chapters, same book, same author, same event, but directly contradictory. Critics of the Bible cite this constantly. It appears in virtually every list of New Testament contradictions, and I understand why. On its face, in the Greek, and in every translation from the Greek, it is a flat contradiction. The Aramaic dissolves it in one word. The Aramaic word kala, Q-A-L-A, means voice. It also means sound. These are two different things. A voice is directed communication, words addressed to someone. A sound is noise, something heard but not necessarily understood or addressed. Acts 9:7 correctly translated. The men which journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a sound, but seeing no man. Acts 22 verse 9 correctly translated. They that were with me saw the light and were afraid, but they heard not the voice of him that spoke to me. They heard something. They heard the noise, the sound, the reverberation, whatever was accompanying the encounter, but they did not hear the voice, the directed words, the communication that was addressed specifically to Paul. They weren't meant to hear it. It wasn't for them. So no contradiction. The Greek translator used the same word, voice, in both verses, and by doing so, he created an apparent contradiction that has puzzled Bible readers for 2,000 years and delighted critics for at least 3 centuries. The Aramaic text is consistent throughout. It always was. So, 10 examples. Let me tell you what we've seen. We've seen Paul's most famous chapter produce 2 completely different Greek words, burned and boast, explained perfectly by a single Aramaic root. We've seen a saying of Jesus that appears in 3 Gospels, where the lost Aramaic meaning reveals that he was speaking to fishermen about a fishing rope, not a camel. We've seen a single verse in John where 3 Greek manuscripts use 3 different words, because, when, and since. All of them legitimate translations of one Aramaic word. An event that is impossible if the original was Greek, and expected if the original was Aramaic. We've seen Jesus on the cross ask not, "Why have you forsaken me?" but, "Why have you spared me?" A reading that makes complete sense in context and eliminates a theological problem that has occupied commentators for 2,000 years. We've seen Jesus apparently commanding hatred of families, a contradiction with his own teaching that dissolves the moment you see that the Aramaic word means put aside, not hate. We've seen Peter's great Pentecost image of the resurrection. God loosed the cords of Sheol, cutting the ropes that held the dead captive, but garbled into the loosing of pain, because the translator chose the wrong meaning of one Aramaic root. We've seen Simon the leper become Simon the jar maker. the moment you read the same 4 consonants with the correct vowels. We've seen a perfect Aramaic couplet, earrings on dogs, pearls before swine, half reserved and half garbled in the Greek, with the structural parallelism only visible in the original language. And we've seen one of the most commonly cited New Testament contradictions. Did they hear the voice or didn't they? Dissolve instantly when you understand that the Aramaic word kala means both voice and sound. 10 examples from Paul's letters, from the Gospels, from Acts. Every single one traceable to a specific Aramaic word. Every single one either creating a problem in Greek that doesn't exist in Aramaic, or revealing something about the original language of Jesus that the Greek translation obscured. The question I keep coming back to is this: at what point does a pattern of evidence stop being circumstantial and start being conclusive? At what point do we say, this isn't coincidence, this isn't scribal error, and this isn't theological bias in the manuscript tradition? This is the fingerprint of a Semitic original. For me personally, I passed that point long ago. The New Testament was written in Aramaic. The Greek we have is a translation. And those translations, made by men doing their honest best with a difficult task, left traces everywhere of the original language they were working from. These aren't just curiosities. They're not footnotes in a scholar's edition. They're the words of Jesus and Paul and Peter and John in the language they actually spoke and thought and prayed. And the closer we get to that language, the closer we get to what was actually said. That's what's been lost in translation. And it's worth finding. The Aramaic New Testament has been waiting. It doesn't require you to abandon anything you believe. It just asks you to look a little more closely at what was actually said. Thanks for watching.